When our men and women sign up to serve in the military, knowing that death or injury is a possibility, they are assured that there is a safety net for them. They believe that should they incur injuries or illness on active duty, that the Veterans Administration, established and funded by Congress, will be there for them. It is a sacred trust. In the film Article 99, so named for an action in the military, such as cowardice or desertion, the late actor Ray Liotta starred as a VA doctor who sees corruption, negligence, and mismanagement with patients dying and tries to do something about it. He finds it is an uphill battle. Art often imitates reality. However, the long history of the VA is anything but a positive report on one of the most critical government agencies funded by taxpayers. While recent major positive changes were initiated by President Donald Trump in his first term, there is still much to do. Here's why. When was the VA created? What were the problems early on? Why was more not done to fix these issues? How did it escalate, and why? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Following World War I, on August 9, 1921, President Warren G. Harding signed an act of Congress consolidating the War Risk Bureau and other several agencies into the new Veterans Bureau. The Bureau was created to aid the thousands of World War I veterans in need of medical and employment services. Each of the Bureau's 14 nationwide offices had the authority to act without awaiting approval from the main office. Scottish-born U.S. Marine Corps and Army veteran Major Charles Robert Forbes was confirmed by the Senate as the first director. However, due to a lack of centralized management and oversight, Forbes took bribes and looted millions from veterans' programs through fraudulent hospital contracts and kickbacks. He was convicted in 1926 and sent to federal prison. Following this fallout, the Veterans Administration was created in 1930 by combining three agencies: the Veterans Bureau, Bureau of Pensions, and the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. This was to be managed by the headquarters in Washington, D.C. But things did not get any better over the next century. The VA didn't just have a quality problem, it had a criminal problem. Extortionists, sexual predators, pill pushers, and negligent doctors, and even professional killers have used the system as a shield. Veterans paid for it with their lives, their health, and their dignity. In 1989, the VA was elevated to cabinet-level status as the Department of Veterans Affairs. Due to the long list of issues regarding criminal physicians working in the VA, here are just some of the greatest hits. Just last year in 2024, lawmakers heard testimony from the Deputy Assistant Inspector General, Dr. Jennifer Baptiste, regarding the serious problems that surfaced at the Hampton, Virginia VA Medical Center. The House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations held a hearing entitled, "What Has Happened to Hampton?" The panel's chair, Representative Jen Kiggins, Republican of Virginia's 2nd District, said she and her staff spoke to 25 VA whistleblowers. Quoting her, "Through this work, I repeatedly heard reports of patient safety concerns, ineffective facility leadership, internal employee disputes, and dirty surgical operating rooms." But the problems within the VA system go back decades, and most veterans had no idea how dangerous the VA environment was when they entered into the system. During the 1990s through 2000s, Dr. Michael Swango found a secure job at the VA. Before he was hired, he was already a suspected serial killer, although no charges were brought. And due to the difficulty in recruiting doctors who make a far better income in private practice, shortcuts were taken. In August 1985, he was convicted in the non-fatal poisonings of patients in Illinois and served 2 years of a 5-year sentence. In March 1992, he secured residency in Sioux Falls, South Dakota using forged documents. Starting in 1993, several healthy patients died and Swango's past surfaced, and he was fired. Again, using forgeries, Swango was hired as a psychiatry resident at State University of New York at Stony Brook, assigned to a Veterans Administration hospital without a serious background check, although rumors abounded. If the VA had done its due diligence, they would have known about his criminal record and revocation of his medical license. Luckily, the FBI intervened before he could start killing VA patients there. Swango later pled guilty to killing up to 60 patients. In 2012, Dr. Robert Morris Levy, a pathologist, was sentenced for manslaughter in the Veterans Healthcare System of the Ozarks, Arkansas deaths because he falsified test results, misdiagnosed cancers, and was intoxicated on duty over 1,000 times, but did not lose his job despite being linked to at least 15 veteran deaths. The VA was well aware of his actions, but ignored red flags and failed to remove him for years. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dr. Mahir Huttam was a minimally invasive laparoscopic and robotic surgeon for the VA from 2012 until he was terminated in 2013 for blowing the whistle on medical mistakes, improper healthcare methods, procedural shortcuts, and he became one of the public whistleblowers during the National VA Patient Care Scandal, which resulted in new leadership and policy changes aimed at better serving veterans under President Donald Trump in 2017. After Huttam came forward a decade ago, he is still waiting for the agency to fully pay him in his employment discrimination case, even after a federal judge ruled in his favor. The government targets their own. The best examples of corruption and cover-up were the VA employees in Phoenix, Arizona, who created fake wait lists to make it appear as if veterans were receiving timely care. In fact, it was proven that failure to actually book appointments and treat veterans already registered resulted in the documented deaths of over 40 veterans. These American patriots died waiting for appointments that never happened, although they were lied to and told to stand by for a future appointment, while VA employees got performance bonuses based upon falsified data. CNN and whistleblowers blew the lid off the story, and the congressional inquiry was launched. But no major reforms were enacted, although Congress finally passed the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act of 2014. Billions of dollars were wasted. Money was diverted, bonuses paid, basically stolen, while supposedly being sent to fix the problems under the Obama administration. It was a failure. VA Secretary Eric Shinseki resigned in disgrace, and there was no major reform until the first Trump administration, but it takes time to repair a broken and corrupt system. Over 100 veterans have died by their own hand on VA property, many in parking lots, as a final act of protest. In 2014, Paula Padin, then a public information officer for the Phoenix VA, joined Dr. Sam Foote, who worked at the VA for 24 years, to blow the whistle on fraudulent patient waiting lists to make it appear that vets were being seen within the required time frame. The Phoenix VA Health System Director Sharon Hellman and 2 other officials were placed on administrative leave. That was as far as it went. The scandal led to the resignation of several VA officials, including the department's cabinet secretary, the aforementioned Eric Shinseki. The DOJ declined to press charges on most involved, as Shinseki squashed criminal whistleblower complaints, refused to send legitimate cases to the Department of Justice, and expanded the cover-up operations. Padin's book, A Sacred Duty: How a Whistleblower Took on the VA and Won, and Dr. Sam Foote helped expose the Phoenix VA scandal. The official patient list, which was sent up the chain of command to Washington, showed veterans receiving health care within the prescribed times. It was a lie. The unofficial but accurate list showed the actual wait times. In some cases, veterans were waiting more than a year for care and dying. Padin had immediate and ruthless retaliation, and she was charged by the federal government for disclosing confidential records and had to hire a criminal defense attorney. At the Tomah VA Medical Center in Wisconsin, Dr. David Houlihan, known as the Candyman, prescribed lethal levels of opioids and benzodiazepines to veterans, often against protocol. At least one veteran, Jason Simkakowski, died from mixed drug toxicity. Following a congressional investigation, Houlihan was fired in 2014 but never criminally charged. He was protected by the system. Simkakowski's family won a settlement. In 2015, the VA Inspector General report found that 307 veterans died waiting for care, medical malpractice, and incompetence, or were just lost in the system. It also uncovered scheduling manipulation persisted across multiple VA hospitals similar to the Phoenix operation. Reports from the Office of Special Counsel found routine retaliation against VA employees who reported fraud or malpractice was standard policy, but problems persisted. In 2017, David Shulkin, the newly installed Trump-era VA secretary, was discovered to have used VA funds for a European vacation with his wife disguised as official travel. At least he was fired in 2018 by President Trump. In 2019, Dr. Edgar Lopez was convicted for operating a disability fraud ring in the Puerto Rico VA. Lopez created fake medical records to help fake patients file false disability claims. He took bribes in exchange for approving fraudulent paperwork and was convicted, but the problem lasted for some time and the VA simply ignored it. In 2022, it came to light that Dr. Michael T. Sisko had sexually assaulted patients during routine exams in the Kansas City VA Medical Center. His superiors were informed by the patients and even concerned staff, but they delayed his termination and failed to alert law enforcement promptly. He was finally arrested, lost his medical license, and multiple lawsuits followed. In 2023, at the Durham VA in North Carolina, Dr. Ernestine Briggs King, who practiced sexual assault and harassment, despite multiple official complaints of sexual misconduct against male and female staff, was still promoted. To silence the scandal, she was quietly removed after internal investigations went public. No charges were ever filed despite substantial sworn testimony and corroborating evidence. In 2024, Tara Saravino of West Haven, Connecticut, was sentenced to 2 years of probation for diverting narcotics from veterans under her care while she worked as a nurse at the West Haven VA Medical Center's intensive care unit. Between January to July 2023, Saravino ingested fentanyl, hydromorphone, and oxycodone intended for patients in her care. In one instance, she repeatedly introduced fentanyl into the system of a brain-dead patient after claiming she observed him in pain and having a seizure. Over a 9-day period, Saravino administered fentanyl to the patient approximately 19 times so that she could divert some for herself. This case was investigated by the VA OIG DEA New Haven's Tactical Diversion Squad and the West Haven Police Department. Also in 2024, Rajesh Modabai Patel, a primary care physician at the VA Medical Center in Decatur, Georgia, was found guilty of violating a patient's constitutional right to bodily integrity while acting under color of law and for engaging in unwanted sexual contact. Patel was charged with sexually assaulting 4 of his female patients during routine exams between 2019 and 2020. The jury acquitted him of charges related to 3 victims and found him guilty of violating the 4th victim. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, 71, of Collegeville, Pennsylvania, was charged by indictment in April 2021. After a 1-week trial in October 2024, a federal grand jury convicted the defendant of 22 counts of wire fraud for misusing his VA position to steal from the agency. Rumors had abounded as to his actions, but no action was taken. In 2025, Hassan was sentenced by United States District Judge John F. Murphy to 64 months imprisonment and 3 years of supervised release for theft of the Department of Veterans Affairs funds exceeding $500,000. Hassan was also ordered to pay $565,058.70 in restitution, with $150,000 of that restitution due in 30 days and a $2,200 special assessment. Christiana Ogmanaya, a registered nurse at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center in Houston, Texas, was indicted on May 7, 2025 for creating false government records. She claimed to have checked on a patient multiple times between July 26 and 27, 2024, despite having no contact. That patient was later found dead, which was ruled a self-termination. Prosecutors alleged she logged visits that never happened. She is still pending trial, and if convicted, she faces up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Media and advocacy groups documented ongoing mistreatment, delays, and negligent care at Houston's VA facilities, including disturbing stories like veterans left uncleaned, dehydration, wrongful feeding tube placement, and nearly fatal errors in post-surgical care. These are not necessarily criminal charges, but raise serious concerns. One common thread in the VA system is lack of oversight and accountability. A major problem has been drug overprescription, especially the massive abuse of opioids and psychiatric medications without peer review or oversight. Hundreds of reports have been filed for sexual misconduct, doctors assaulting and even killing vulnerable patients, fraud, substance abuse by staff, disability scams, impairment on the job, fatal misdiagnoses, falsified billing, gross negligence, and incompetence. These were facts which, when reported, were often ignored or buried by VA human resources, and while whistleblowers were punished, they were also silenced and fired. All the while, the veterans suffered. VA employees in Arkansas and Texas were charged with creating fake medical records to approve fraudulent claims in exchange for kickbacks, but only after a whistleblower came forward. But why does this even happen? How do these people remain employed, causing harm? Well, the answer is simple, and is being addressed once again by the second Trump administration. Federal government civil service protections make it nearly impossible to fire even dangerous doctors. In fact, the VA mastered the well-known art of musical staff management. In most cases, the VA buried complaints or reassigned doctors instead of firing them. Some doctors are shielded by powerful federal unions. Basically, they just relocated the problem to another location without even admitting there was a problem in the first place. Image was more important than helping veterans. The VA has always handled their criminal complaints and other investigations internally. This is basically the same situation as if the Gestapo in Nazi Germany were to handle the investigation into complaints by inmates regarding SS treatment in the death camps. The VA self-investigation policies were a joke. Due to the culture of retaliation, whistleblowers are punished, fired, and often smeared, while bad doctors are protected. These facts are what prompted President Trump to create the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017. This was intended to speed up terminations of criminal employees and incompetent employees, which happened until 2020. But after the election of Joseph Biden, and see our 4 videos on him, it was not implemented. One major problem is that the credentialing office modernization section is still incomplete in many VA regions. Likewise, external audits and reviews of complaints are mostly ignored or watered down long before they reach Congress. Until there is true external criminal oversight, transparent reporting, and zero tolerance for misconduct, the VA will remain a haven for some of the worst doctors in America. Since then, it's been plagued by recurring scandals involving fraud, incompetence, whistleblower retaliation, and preventable deaths. For example, during the 1980s and 90s, the VA consistently dismissed, delayed, or denied the health effects of Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam vets and later Gulf War syndrome. The real reason was that they did not want to spend the money to address these medical issues, but that did not stop them from paying their administrators massive annual bonuses, often based upon false filings to the federal government. The result was delayed compensation for tens of thousands of veterans, which eventually resulted in congressional hearings that initially forced partial action. Eventually, these conditions were added to the VA's list of compensated disabilities. Examples of surgical malpractice in VA facilities abounded. In 2019, for example, VA Medical Center in Manchester, New Hampshire, was sued after veterans contracted infections from non-sterile instruments. What was the VA's response? Delay, deny, defend. Supervisors trained employees on how to game the system. Bonuses and promotions were tied to success metrics. In many cases, VA executives denied wrongdoing or claimed ignorance and buried serious problems and investigations. Starting in 2020, the VA mismanaged COVID-19 protocols, exposing veterans and staff to the virus, and there were multiple outbreaks at VA-run nursing homes. Whistleblowers released internal memos that revealed the lack of PPE, which had been paid for, but the money was used elsewhere and unaccounted for, and high-level cover-ups were exposed. Now, under the Trump administration, who urged reform starting in 2021 and lasting until 2024, the disability claims backlog and burn pit failures had a backlog swell to 900,000 plus unresolved claims. Naturally, the VA was slow to acknowledge the effects of burn pit exposure. Only after the PACT Act of 2022 was passed did the VA begin to seriously respond. The legacy of failure is pretty simple to explain. Bureaucracy, layers of red tape, and performance bonuses encourage falsifying records. Firing bad employees takes years due to union protections and HR loopholes. Outdated technology and antiquated systems, such as paper files and legacy software, undermine efficiency. The VA has fostered a culture of fear where whistleblowers had no protection and were punished more often than wrongdoers. One remedy was Veterans' Choice and Mission Acts that shifted some care to private outsiders who are compensated by the VA, thanks to Donald Trump. These were the result of many whistleblowers, most notably Brandon Coleman, who was a PTSD counselor who was retaliated against after warning about suicidal patients being ignored, and Joe Colon, who exposed fraudulent overtime payments in Puerto Rico. As of 2025, the VA still has persistent wait times and mismanagement in many locations, and it remains one of the least trusted federal agencies by its own clients. But let me break it down and state specifically, this is not endemic of every Veterans Administration hospital. Many are very efficient and work extremely well. But are there solutions? Yes. When Donald Trump ran in 2016 with a hardline message, "The VA is broken and we will fix it," he did so. During his first presidency from 2017 to 2021, the Trump administration implemented some of the most significant structural changes to the Department of Veterans Affairs in decades. Here's a no BS breakdown of how Trump changed the VA through the VA Mission Act in 2018, what improved, what flopped, and what it all actually meant for veterans. It replaced the failed 2014 Choice program with a new system allowing veterans more access to private sector doctors if the VA couldn't schedule an appointment within 20 days or if the veteran lived more than 30 minutes from a VA facility. This streamlined healthcare under one program, which gave 9 million veterans greater flexibility in where to get care. In fact, full disclosure, my son Max, an Afghanistan veteran, was one of many veterans who benefited from these reforms. In addition, the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017 gave the VA Secretary power to fire underperforming or corrupt employees faster. Creating the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection was a good move. It protected whistleblowers from retaliation and allowed for more than 8,000 VA employees to be removed or disciplined by 2020. But some critics pointed out that most firings were low-level staff, not senior officials, and reports are that some retaliation still happens to whistleblowers. Additionally, the Electronic Health Record Modernization ordered the VA to adopt Cerner EHR system, aligning with the DoD system for seamless records, creating a single lifetime record for every service member and veteran. This was launched at select VA centers in 2020 to reduce duplicate records and improve care. Trump started it, but the Biden administration derailed all the positive results when VA healthcare providers were diverted to the U.S. southern border to provide illegal immigrants with free health care at the expense of veterans. Trump had expanded VA.gov appointment booking, wait time tracking, customer satisfaction surveys, and public dashboards showing performance metrics for VA hospitals. Veteran trust in the VA following Trump's changes rose to 91% by 2020, according to internal surveys. Before that, it hovered around 30 or 40%. This was the first time that wait times at VA outperformed the private sector in some areas. The days of the VA whistleblower retaliation program's mantra of protecting the institution, not the vets, was coming to a close. But how do we finally repair the VA permanently? Well, I, your humble narrator, have some ideas. First, place every member of Congress, House and Senate, inside the VA healthcare system. Once they experience the problems, see how fast it gets repaired. Eliminate federal employee unions, which protect violators. If the military can't have a union, why should they? Make sure the VA gets more funding than foreign governments, or eliminate foreign spending entirely and keep our tax money here to treat veterans. This would allow the VA to pay higher salaries and attract better talent. Eliminate the bonus incentive program, which creates the environment for fraud. Have the Congressional Budget Office hold annual audits of the VA nationwide, accounting for the money. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem is solvable. It just takes the proper attitude and the proper motivation to treat our veterans with respect and dignity. They earned it. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.